Now, put your head down and just work.
I'll tell you the shortcut to success. It's do the work, right? It's to actually do the work.
If you're struggling to be disciplined, just do the work. You've heard this message countless times, right? And although this message sparks your motivation, what usually happens is you do the work, have a few productive and disciplined days, and then you slack off and wonder why you always self-sabotage your efforts. But don't worry, because since I was 17 years old, I've also struggled with this problem. I would swing on the pendulum of extreme discipline one day and then follow it up by being in a rut, feeling the pangs of demotivation and crippling stagnation the next. The underlying thought process after having a productive day full of discipline, eating well, working out, would be something like this. Aha, today I have won. Because I've been disciplined today, that means my life is set and complete forever, and I'll never have to act with discipline again. But then my alarm would go off the next day and I'd meet the day with fatigue, confusion and no motivation. My previously disciplined self nowhere to be seen. I hated the instability, and I know you hate it too. But fortunately, after 5 years of painstaking introspection, I found the one cause and solution to this problem. And if you grasp this idea, I'm certain that you'll be able to build the sustainable discipline you so desire. And the idea involves something you already know, I hope, how to do. Sweeping a floor. In his book, Ego is the Enemy, Ryan Holiday relays a quote from a friend which perfectly describes the nature of discipline. Training is like sweeping the floor. Just because we've done it once doesn't mean we don't have to do it again. Every day the dust comes back. Every day we must sweep. What seems common sense to a street sweeper didn't strike me as so obvious at first. In fact, it took a while for it to sink in. Here's how it relates to discipline. Firstly, sweeping in this context refers to you acting with discipline. For example, the act of sweeping is you unfolding your yoga mat at the same time you usually do each day to stretch. It's the student cleaning his desk and sitting down for a 90-minute bout of studying, or the writer who, despite all feelings of resistance, sits down, opens his laptop and begins to type.
I don't actually do yoga, by the way. I just thought I'd try and be cool.
As we know, if we fail to frequently sweep our kitchen floor, dust will inevitably build up. So it's exactly the same with our skills and good habits. If we fail to practice them frequently, they will inevitably gather dust. This could be referred to as the use it or lose it principle in neuroscience, in which brain networks will be forgotten if they're not frequently used. So imagine you speak fluent Italian, but for the next 5 years you decide to stop speaking the language completely. Well, you probably won't be able to impress your friends as much as you would like to on your next holiday to Rome. But if you practice conversational Italian for 30 minutes every week, you won't just maintain your level, you'll improve it. So the first rule of sweeping is learn how to squat. No, it's no matter how well you have previously swept, the dust will always return. But in a very optimistic vein, the amount of dust that gathers is dependent on how well you previously swept. For example, let's say I've been running every day for the last 6 months, but I suddenly decide to take a week off. Now, the dust won't have gathered too much and my endurance won't have dwindled as extremely as it would have if I would have taken 6 months off. So the sweeper is the person who understands that the dust returns, the necessity of sweeping, and the dangers of leaving the dust to build up. But the issue doesn't stop with sweeping. We must also understand another aspect of how discipline works. Despite what some people tell us, discipline is a finite resource. Neuroscientifically, the act of discipline is mediated by your prefrontal cortex, this front part of your brain, and it does so by engaging in top-down processing, so it can guide your actions towards something requiring discipline, otherwise known as willpower. But using willpower is cognitively demanding, hence it's much easier for you to be disciplined earlier during the day than later in the evening, when you're less tired. So in this sense, we can start to see discipline as a cyclical process, one which rises and falls each day, and a process that we must understand and respect if we want to work with instead of against ourselves. Because what you're after is sustainable productivity and discipline, not frequent bursts of extreme discipline followed by crippling procrastination straight after. Lastly, what you're not after is chasing a futile fantasy of discipline completion. Let me explain this further. For the last 20 years, my dad's been an alcoholic, but is now 4 years sober. Around 2 years ago, when we met up for the first time after not seeing each other for like 4 or 5 years, we started to speak about his addiction, and he told me, "Lewis, I will always be an alcoholic because no matter where I am, the addiction is always there with me, sat on a bar stool, around the corner, whispering in my ear, tempting me back into the addiction." And at first, I thought this way of framing his addiction was enforcing a negative identity about himself that would doom him into the addiction forever, in the sense of it was reinforcing the identity of, I am an alcoholic, therefore he would be more likely to drink. But after I thought about it, I've realised he's right. Because thinking this way allows him to pay each day the due respect it needs in order to enact discipline and say no to alcohol daily. Because quitting an addiction isn't just a choice you make once. It's a choice you make every single day for the rest of your life. So it's the same process when we act with discipline. Because when we see discipline as something we will have to exercise anew each day, we forget the idea of discipline completion, and we give each day the necessary amount of focus it requires, which will vary each day. Because the core reason you struggle to maintain discipline is because you want to see a completion to discipline. You want to feel the freedom of relaxing into peace after being disciplined, but instead of allowing your discipline to rise and fall, you frantically press the discipline button and then compensate by staying in peace for too long, thus swinging on the pendulum between discipline and laziness. Therefore, to understand the problem is the solution. In the grips of these insane yet understandable desires to complete our lives by acting with discipline once, we can see that this is merely just a desire of the mind to attain security. But as Alan Watts argues, the desire for security is a contradiction within itself. If I want to be secure, that is, protected from the flux of life, I'm wanting to be separate from life. Yet it is this very sense of separateness which makes me feel insecure. The desire for security and the feeling of insecurity are the same thing. To hold your breath is to lose your breath. Desiring to attain security within your habit formation is like expecting the sun to grow a pair of arms and wave at you. It's just not going to happen. Now, that's not to say that consistency isn't possible. It most certainly is. It's just to say that your consistency can only be based on a fundamental understanding that each day you will have to return to the task anew and with a beginner's mind. Thirdly, and perhaps most controversial, your standards are screwing you over. There's no doubt it's important to have high standards in many aspects of your life, who you spend time with, the quality of your work, and what you do with your waking hours. But I've noticed that the higher my standards are for discipline, the more likely I am to swing on the pendulum between discipline and laziness. To elaborate, when we strive for the idea of discipline completion, we convince ourselves that every minute of every day we have to be disciplined. But, as mentioned, discipline has a daily expiry.
Did you move something off my side when you were filming in my room?
Oh yeah, the Kindle, I put it behind.
The brown envelope?
Yeah, it was behind. So to set the standard of being disciplined all of the time is not only unrealistic, it's actually a form of self-sabotage. Because despite what you think you see online, no one in their right mind is acting with discipline all of the time. Because whether they're an athlete or a really successful entrepreneur, their life likely dances between periodized discipline and light-hearted restoration. So drop the one thing that's holding you back, your crippling high standards, and just aim for the mantra of, more often than not, I'm disciplined. Finally, even though this past hour might have been productive for you, which you can give yourself a cheeky pat on the back for, the dust will inevitably return, and some days there'll be more dust than others. Contending with mammoth or minuscule tasks, doing productive work, scheduling your day, prioritising your mental and physical health are all a consequence of you sweeping the floor each day. And this is okay, because this is exactly what makes life meaningful. Because, here's a thought. If the dust never returned, what would be the point in doing anything? If, after doing something once, you never had to do it again, why bother? It is the infinite challenge of sweeping the dust that provides our lives with meaning. Lastly, I think it's a sign of optimism that the dust load is dependent on how regularly you sweep, because then everything is up to you. Nevertheless, keep your broom close and continue sweeping.